Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We are so pleased to have two panelists today who are going to be telling us a little bit about how they have had very good luck in and success in growing their departments because of programs or courses that they have successfully been able to recruit students to. So our first panelist is Robert Thomas, who is the department chair in the Environmental Sciences Department at the University of Montana Western. And our second panelist is Wayne Powell, who is also a department chair in the Department of Earth and Environmental Sciences at Brooklyn College. Without further ado, here's Rob and Wayne.
Good morning. My name is Rob Thomas, and I am in the Environmental Sciences Department at the University of Montana Western. We're located in southwestern Montana, a rural environment town of about 6,000 people. The campus is 120 years old and primarily traditional age students. Next slide, please. So a little background on the campus. In our case, change to the campus as a whole is instrumental to understanding change in enrollment patterns in the Environmental Sciences Department, which did not exist. I arrived there in the mid-1990s, and it was the last normal school in America. It was the last teachers' college left in America, founded in the 1890s. And we generated a liberal arts degree program using the coursework for secondary education students, and eventually we adopted block scheduling where students take one class at a time for 18 instructional days and then go on to the next class. The entire campus does this, and we're the first public university in U.S. history to do this. Next slide, please. The program that I am a part of is an environmental sciences degree, but we have emphases in many areas, including geology, environmental geochemistry, and wetlands management, all three of which have heavy geoscience components. My students work in a variety of areas, including natural resource extraction, land management agencies, and private environmental consulting firms. You can see that the curriculum that they take is a pretty standard curriculum for geology students, typically at most universities. Next slide, please. The transition to block scheduling and our adoption of experiential learning using that system has dramatically changed the institution. When I started, the enrollment was about 500. We are now at 1,500 FTE. We have had 4 Carnegie Case professors, including 1 U.S. Professor of the Year. That was me. We've recently ranked number 2 in U.S. News and World Report for small class sizes on a budget in the United States, and we received a Montana University Regents Professorship. That was me, and that had never happened before to any campus other than the 2 flagship universities. And we have had widespread support from the Montana University system, which is a big change from where we were in 1995, where closure was really where we were at. Next slide, please. All right, outcomes and assessment. So how has all this panned out? It has been an amazing transition. Again, students take 1 class at a time. They do it for 18 instructional days, and the classes are experiential. The geoscience classes are taught almost exclusively in the field. The only classes that are not taught necessarily 100% in the field are the introductory geology classes, in particular the introduction of physical geology. The introduction to environmental geology, as you'll see here in a moment, is a field-based class. and it's also gen ed class and as a recruiting class for students. We have seen that the student satisfaction surveys, the Noel Levitt surveys, show incredible improvement over where we used to be pre-adoption of this block system and immersion learning, experiential learning. Our students score very high on the Cornell Critical Thinking Test, and so it has not hurt that we are not doing traditional lecturing and testing in terms of their critical thinking skills. And again, our National Survey of Student Engagement, which is the graph on the right, scores are the highest in the state of Montana, and they beat everybody in our Carnegie class as well. Four-year graduation rates for the campuses have increased by 20% and climbing every year. The first to second year persistence rates, so the number of people that we keep from the first to the second year, has gone up by 40%. And the environmental sciences majors have doubled since we adopted the block. Mostly, I think, because of the field experience that they're getting in the introductory class, which they then see that this is something that I'd like to do as my career. And the geology option class sizes have doubled since 2005, a reflection of the increased number of majors in the environmental sciences major. Next slide, please. And finally, the application in environmental geology. This is an introductory course, Geology 103, and it's a field course. It's designed around 3 tectonic settings in the field, since we have excellent access to that here in southwest Montana. The students go out and they work in a convergent, a divergent, which you can see in the photograph to the right, and a shear zone environment, and they gather data, and they learn how to use the compass, they learn how to gather field data, they learn how to make maps. It's a little bit like field camp for introductory students. They then take the data, and I give them land management questions that they have to apply the data that they've gathered to answering in technical reports. So the assessment is not based on exams, it's based on these reports and the quality of the work that they do. So in the photograph on the right, you see a normal fault that is cutting a 6-million-year-old basalt flow. That's an active normal fault. And the students are given a subdivision overlay for that area, and they have to deal with all of the geohazards associated with that site, lot by lot, for a fictitious subdivision that I lay out on the mapping area. They use the data then to make recommendations as to where development should or should not occur by lot. So they have to avoid things like where the fault scarp might be, where landslides might be, where is the appropriate place to place a water well and why. And so we're integrating all aspects of environmental geology from a field-based data collection perspective and then writing it up in a report. And I think that's my last slide. Yes. Thank you.
Hi. Hello, I'm Wayne Powell, Chair of Earth and Environmental Sciences at Brooklyn College. Quite a contrasting environment to Rob's, and hopefully you'll all be identified with one, the other, or somewhere in the middle. Next slide, please. So Brooklyn College is a public institution. It was created as a university system run exclusively out of New York City. So it's like a state system, but completely city-based with 20 campuses in the city itself. It was designed to meet the needs of local students, and in its design had never been intended to recruit externally from the city. In-state tuition is a little under $6,000, which is cheaper than neighboring New Jersey public institutions and even upstate SUNY campuses. Our enrollment on campus is a little over 16,000, and we are a non-residential commuter campus with 93% of our students living within the city, living in the city before they attended CUNY campuses. And at Brooklyn College, over 75% of our students are living and raised in Brooklyn. Next slide, please. So our student body is about as diverse as you can possibly get. The diversity of Brooklyn College campus reflects the diversity of Brooklyn as a whole, which ranks as one of the most diverse cities in the country. So as the college proudly describes quite commonly, we have about students from about 100 countries with over 100 languages spoken. And keep in mind that the very broad demographic breakdowns of, Black, Hispanic, White, Asian is really quite limiting, and the divisions and differences between national groups within one of these demographic groups can be really quite striking. So we are really looking at students not from 5 groups, but truly from 100 different cultures. The other thing that we have to keep in mind, so that these students are not necessarily acclimatized to North American educational standards. Also, their families, most students are first in their families to ever attend college, and so they are not coming from a family that supports or knows how to support students going through a higher educational experience. The income of our students is problematic. Over 60% of our students are working in order to pay at least part of their bills. And the living costs here in New York City are really very, very high. So many of these students are still living with families and taking care of family members. So they are incredibly highly committed in their time beyond the school calendar, both at home, taking care of family members, and raising money for their education, and in many cases supporting the family. Next slide, please. So where does earth science fit into Brooklyn College as a whole? Well, one thing about Brooklyn College is that we do have a required core curriculum. And this was initiated in 1985, and earth science, geology has been part of that since it was created. This becomes a major potential recruiting tool for us as we get about 600 to 800 students a year coming through these introductory classes. As for programs at the undergraduate level, we have Bachelors of Science and Bachelors of Arts in Earth and Environmental Sciences, as well as a degree program for earth science teachers, because New York State is a state which has earth science as one of its exam-based, standardized content courses. And in fact, the majority of students in high school do take earth science rather than what is perceived as a more difficult science, such as chemistry or physics, to get their science, second science high school requirement. We also have an environmental studies program, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later. It's been around for a long time and was really a very unsuccessful languishing program, and this has gone through major revision as well and is helping to boost our enrollment. Next slide, please. So in recruiting students to earth science at our campus, we really had to think about our student base. So some of the statistics come up in the next slide, but we were When I became chair 9 years ago, I've been stuck in this role too long. When I became chair 9 years ago, it was out of necessity. I was junior faculty. I'd just become tenured, but the department was really kind of in a very precarious position. UConn had just closed nearby, and as a department, we were sitting at 4 majors. So it was, all of our courses were losing money. You know, we couldn't afford to lose any more students, or else no classes would run whatsoever. So, out of pure self-preservation, became chair to try to start to turn this around. And the main focus of this transformation was to step back from our curriculum and say, all right, it's not the geoscience that I knew. I'm born and raised Canadian. Environment or earth resources were a big part of my growing up. There were plenty of jobs available for geologists, and it was, you know, in the face of students. They saw it as, you know, part of their culture. Our Brooklyn College students are completely different. New Yorkers, as in general, do not identify with natural environments. Our students do not identify with standard geological content. If we start talking about the kinds of just general volcanoes, mountains, most of our students have never seen these things. Most students have not left the city as a whole. Many students even haven't gone upstate or crossed into Jersey, let alone seen much of the world. So we have to get inside their heads and think about, well, how would they see earth science if they're not seeing it in their normal perspective? And if they took it in high school, they took it with that very natural world perspective, and so potentially we're alienated from it in that. So we need to rethink it in terms of their perspective, their connections, their priorities, and because these kids are really in many ways influenced by their family, and family pushing them in certain directions, we have to take into it their family relationships and their culture. So what is it that seemed to matter to our students? Well, clearly career opportunities were the priority. We had seen many students coming to us saying they loved our class, but their parents would not allow them to become earth science majors because they didn't see it as a career path. In many ways, they saw it as they would a program in the liberal arts or social sciences. So we had to bring that to the front. We had to look at how our content transferred to the local community, not to the country or the world as a whole. We try to build that up through the program. But in our introductory courses in particular, it was about how does earth science directly impact the local Brooklyn community, and how does being an earth scientist potentially improve the living standards of families living here. Also, remember, we are a commuter campus, and so with students coming on campus for only a certain number of hours a day and then going back home to their families who, again, don't necessarily have the ability to help them in their post-secondary education. We needed to find ways to keep students together on campus longer, build connections, let them help each other through their programs, and they would be their own kind of safety net and would help to keep each other from, keep them on track for graduation, keep them within the program, keep them passing their courses. Next slide, please. So, where are we now? I said when I took over chairship in 2003, 2003, we had 4 majors. We are now steady at approximately 40. This is enough for us to run our courses on a regular basis and break even as far as the dean is concerned in terms of the cost of our classes. If you look at our introductory class for majors, we are now, it's been steadily increasing. About 3 years ago, we moved from having only 1 section to 2 sections per term. And of those students who go into that, we are typically seeing about 25% of those students advancing onto sophomore courses and potentially becoming majors. Of the majors who do declare in earth science, we are now seeing an 85% completion rate, and that's up considerably. In the initial years, we would typically lose many of our students through attrition, and they would either leave the college or go to different programs, and so we were about 40% retention. Also, as we are now graduating more well-prepared students who want to stay within the city, we have created a pipeline into our MS program, and the enrollment in that has about doubled over the last 5 years as well. Was that my last slide, I believe?
Yes, thank you very much, both of our speakers. We're going to open up the webinar for discussions now. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them in your question box. That way we can allow you to ask questions of the speakers. And if you'd like to talk, if you have a microphone and would like to actually talk, raise your hand and I can unmute you. So right now we do have a couple questions coming in from the audience. The first is for Rob. And the question is, Rob, has your budget changed over time, and have you been able to show all the success?
The budget has not changed. The departmental budget has been relatively stagnant to maybe even slightly declined, and the campus budget has also stayed relatively flat. The state of Montana has had about 8 consecutive years of tuition freeze, and so as a result, that being the lion's share of the money for the University of Montana Western, we have not seen an increase in resources. So I think too, maybe the question is, you know, does it take money to do this? And the answer to that is no. It takes faculty resolve to change the way in which they approach their classes, and it takes small size. This works with class sizes of 25 or less. So if you were to have larger class size, I think it's very difficult to pull it off. You can potentially do this as a college within a university. I have discussed this with other universities in a consulting context about putting together one class at a time colleges like an honors college within a university to service at-risk students, those who are low-income, first-generation college-bound, and have them do their general education courses one at a time. And the reason why is because we know that it dramatically improves persistence rates. So if you're looking for ways to keep people in school, this is the way to do it. It also recruits to, you know, the various disciplines that are participating.
Okay, nice. And Rob, are most of your students from Montana?
When I started, that was the case. We now have a pretty robust out-of-state population. We're hovering around 30% of the student population.
Okay, nice.
I think it's also attributable to the transition to the block. We became the inexpensive alternative to Colorado College. Gotcha,
gotcha. This question is for both of our speakers. How would you apply your experiences to larger universities?
Go ahead.
Sorry. What kind of university are we talking about?
Well, I think we were
what size?
So let's say 30,000 and up, 40,000 students.
All right, so you're talking very large introductory
Yes.
classes.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's still possible because it's, from my perspective, it's the catch in our introductory courses is not about the community building quite yet. It's about the connection. And if you can understand where your students are coming from, what their needs and priorities are, and back away from your content, think about what is that they want to see in their class. What do they want to have taught to them? What experiences do they want to have? Start your curriculum design from student need base, and you deliver a class, whether it's to 25 or 250, as long as it's connecting with the students, you're doing what's necessary to make them want to go on to a sophomore class, where then you start building the community.
Excellent. And this is another question for Wayne. What are some concrete examples of how you demonstrate transference of content to the local community?
All right, so what we've done is we've reached out to community partners. This includes the coastline of New York City, particularly in Brooklyn and Queens, is national park land. It used to be military land of various kinds, and it's been ceded over to national parks. So we partner with the National Park Service in trying to clean up, maintain, monitor the Jamaica Bay ecosystem and the parklands, the beaches associated with that. We are partnered with the New York City Parks and Recreation Department in the Mayor Bloomberg's Million Trees program by 2017, planting 1 million new trees within the city. And the way we've connected with them is that they have come to us with the problem that many of the plantings they do are not successful because the soils are not predictable. They are not natural soils. They are all in some way anthropogenic. So we're working with them to better understand plant growth within the city, and this is also getting us into urban agriculture, which is a very, very hot topic for our students. Another example is the large park within Brooklyn is Prospect Park. It has a lake within it, and it attracts millions of visitors each year. It's a major draw for all of Brooklyn. But the lake is having some serious problems with algal blooms due to the fact that the water for the lake is actually from New York City tap water. And the New York City puts phosphorus compounds into the city water in order to limit lead uptake from old lead pipes. So we are working with them to try to figure out how to mediate this problem and bring the lake back to health. So we take these research opportunities that we have, that our faculty have with the various community partners, and we take pieces of that and integrate it right into our curriculum. So if we are doing examples of hydrogeology, we are using the lake system here. We are using our bay systems. We are talking about the changes and how we are implementing them and making things better. So these are the concrete examples. These also help us build out directly into internships for our students, because we have taught them and we've made the introductions. So by the time they're getting into their third year, they're building the relationships with our community partners as well.
Excellent. So this question is for both of our speakers. what fraction of your majors are gained in your general education courses? So basically, how many of them start in your program versus how many of them you actually gain?
Rob, you want to go first?
Sure.
Yeah, I think, thanks, Wayne. I think that, I'm not certain I have the hard numbers, so anecdotally I believe probably better than 75% of the students in the program came not because they showed up on our campus to do environmental sciences because they'd heard about it externally, but they found out about it internally. The reason for that is the campus is 120 years old, and not until 1995 was it no longer a normal school, a teacher's college, and so old perceptions die hard, and people view us as the teacher's college, and so there's little to no reputation for the program itself, and so we recruit primarily internally.
For us, I would say the same thing, that very, very few students come to campus thinking that they want to enter into an earth science department. The experiences on campus are the things that pull them in. So I would say that probably 90% of our students are somehow pulled in through some sort of on-campus recruitment. Perhaps about 30% are from our general education required courses. Problem with our gen ed courses is that in many respects, or they can take them throughout their 4 years at the college, and many of the students will put off their science gen ed courses until late in their career because they're afraid of them. We do work, one key strategy that we do have is that the college has a freshman block program that's been going for the last 10 years or so, and we are the science department that most aggressively works with the Associate Provost's office on this, and we work with those other departments of sociology and history to develop cross-thematic courses for these freshman blocks, because they are the ones where we have the greatest chance of directing students into our programs. I put my best instructors into those courses, and we typically will get probably between 5 and 10, depending on the year, of students who get pulled in from that. And so it's a major flow for us from that particular aspect. A lot of the other stuff is that we make our presence. We support our student club financially as much as we can, and logistically. And our student club goes out, and probably more so than any other departmental or content area-based club on campus, is out there hosting events and putting their name out and being very, very active. And students see this as, they're kind of drawn in by the charisma of those students.
I might add that we, exactly the same as Wayne, the vast majority of students before the block were coming into their science gen eds in their junior and senior year because they were fearful of those classes. So when we adopted the block, we went to a program where the students were cohorted into groups, and they have to take their general education classes in their first year unless they're a transfer student. And so as a result, we're recruiting primarily out of those courses.
Okay, great. Another question that came in from the audience is, do either of you have a recruitment talk or something in that introductory course that talks about careers, opportunities in the geosciences, et cetera, to kind of pull them in?
Absolutely. That comes right at the beginning as we start to do the introduction. It's really putting it in that perspective of earth science as a definite career path within New York City, and we talk about the various government agencies, the various consulting companies that work within the city, the educational opportunities and outreach with the DOE, as well as some of the environmental outreach organizations within the borough. Then we also typically bring in, not just for these students, but for all of our majors, we try to bring in a couple of career-based speakers each term. So devote a couple of afternoon lunch sessions, which we will cater, and invite our students in, our majors, and any of our students in our gen ed courses at that time. And it's someone who is working within the city, making a successful career, and giving his or her particular experience and the sorts of skills that they advise students to pick up before they graduate.
Yeah, similar things for us. It's central to the introductory classes, and what I have done is I've brought in all of our students in the environmental sciences program have to do internships. Most of them, I try to get them into internships the first summer that they have identified the major, and so many of them will do internships for 3 years over the course of the 4-year degree. Those students who are in their junior, senior years and have had those experiences, I bring them in to speak to the class so that they hear from peers about what's possible. And for me, maybe a little easier than Wayne, it's not too far over to the Bakken oil field in North Dakota, and I've got students interning over there who are making over $100,000 a year. So that becomes very attractive. It's pretty attractive to me, actually, but it's very attractive to students in an introductory course to hear those kinds of numbers, because, as Wayne had said earlier, we suffer also from the idea that parents think that geosciences are not a viable route because it's not a professional area like biology or pre-med, pre-vet in the sciences where real jobs occur. The other thing we do, like Wayne, is we have a speaker series called On the Rocks, and it's existed now for 20 years, and the focus of it has always been to bring in people from actual work environments to speak to the students, and the students actually take a course over the duration of their career in the environmental sciences that require them to attend a certain number of these talks. So there is incentive for them to go other than just the pizza after the talk is over.
Great. Another question coming in. What were some of the specific changes that you made in the introductory course that made the greatest impact on your students?
Briefly, Wayne, if you're okay, I'll just say, in our case, it was going completely into the field. This is taking introductory general education students, gen ed core students, and putting them into essentially a field camp environment for a month. I'm not certain it's ever been done. I haven't really looked to see whether anybody's ever tried to do this before, but the impacts are extraordinary. The students are seeing by doing what it is to work in the discipline, and so later on, once they've chosen that continues. And as Wayne was describing, we have lots of partnerships with agencies, consulting firms, nonprofits, and most of the projects I've got going now have real outcomes, technical reports that students are putting together that are actually being utilized by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, for example, on a big stream morphology project we're working on to improve stream habitat for an endangered fish species called fluvial Arctic grayling. And those reports then become portfolio pieces for the students to use in their job hunt. But those are majors. But the introductory students are getting essentially field camp as their gen ed core class. So I think that's the major change we made, and it made a huge difference.
I think in our introductory classes, so we have two. We are Earth and Environmental Sciences, so we have an introduction to Earth science and then an introduction to environmental science. And one is not a prerequisite for the other, so students can come in at any point. I'd say the biggest freshman change that we made, or the one that has the greatest impact, has been in the environmental science course. The lab component of that course was taken away from simply just being a series of individual labs to being a term project that they work on. The project that we chose was a particular piece of coastline in the city, Jamaica Bay, is at high risk. It's an area called Plum Beach, and this area, because of the change in the barrier islands and how they've been stabilized, and the sand migration around that into the harbor, it's changed the way the waves are coming into the bay as a whole. And this little piece of beach is at high risk and as being eroded away at a rapid rate. Just a couple of years ago, before major remediation came in, it almost took out the major highway route through the city, through the borough. The erosion stopped only 10 feet from the Belt Parkway. But one of the key factors here is also in terms of wildlife, it's the biggest horseshoe crab breeding ground within the region. And so a couple things. One, we discovered in research on an OEDG grant that one thing that attracts students to these sorts of projects more than anything else is to somehow involve an animal component. So bringing in the horseshoe crabs, which they're cool, helps capture the kind of imagination of the students. But the key thing that they're doing here in measuring the beach profiles, monitoring, and seeing how they change over time is that at the end of the course, the students from this introductory class are taken to the park headquarters, and they present the results of their research to the park superintendent and the park wardens. So it demonstrates to the students just that their work is real, that it's important, and they feel more important than they have in, certainly throughout any of their other courses. They see that they're doing something real. And that cements the notion that they have the opportunity to not only improve the local environment, but potentially have job opportunities at the end.
Hey, Wayne, do you see any differences among the minority students in regards to your recruitment strategies?
We are more diverse than we used to be. In the beginnings, we would tend to get more students naturally coming to us from Caribbean cultures, and I think that's in part because there is a petroleum connection, and so families out there do see that there are potential well-paying opportunities within geology. So I guess the greatest inroad that we are making is within the African-American neighborhoods here. Not the first-generation Caribbean, but more kind of the more established African-American communities. And that again is becoming it's because of seeing potential for a job, not back on the islands, but seeing potential for employment within the city itself and within the parts of the city that these students identify with.
Great. And earlier, Wayne, I believe you mentioned that about 40% of your students that declared the major actually graduated. Do you know the most important reasons for these students to persist in the major?
In talking, this is informal information, so it's from me talking with my students. You know, we're small enough that we still are very strongly connected with all of our students. And the one biggest change that I made that has changed our persistence rates is providing students with space that is dedicatedly theirs. So this, I guess, was done in two ways. One was we gave them a dedicated club room, so they had a place that they could meet whenever they wanted to. So again, because this is commuter campus and it's a small campus, right? This is New York City, so we don't have a lot of space. Students didn't feel that they couldn't come on campus whenever they wanted to and expect to be able to work together, to get access to the labs, to get access to other students, and get things done. By giving them their dedicated space and also putting combination locks on most of our classrooms instead of the key locks, allowing our students to have access to their lab materials whenever they wanted, as long as the college was open. Changed the nature of their work on campus from being essentially isolated and having little moments to be able to come on and try to get together with a student or a friend to help. But now the students have built a very, very strong cooperative community. So they are always now helping each other. They are always working in groups. They are always scheduling times to come in. And so by just giving them the resources to have access and to kind of own a little piece of the campus, they are now supporting each other in kind of a peer mentoring, peer tutoring sort of approach. But it's got nothing to do with me keeping it going. Now it is self-supportive.
And Rob, do you have any comments with what Wayne just said?
Yeah, we've done almost everything Wayne described. We've done as well. So there must be, if two people think the same way, there must be some truth in it. Yeah, I just think philosophically what Wayne's describing is a really crucial thing. We all understand the importance of a student base to where they can bond, generate a family environment. You know, as an undergraduate myself at Humboldt State, we had one of those rooms, and you know, we had a donut mobile in there with donuts that had been up there probably for 10 years. And you know, the donut mobile was sacred and bonded us. And so I've tried to do the same with my students. Generate a space in which they can hang out and work together. We have gatherings at the beginning of the year to try to galvanize the new people in to the program, and we have a end of the year graduation gathering, barbecue for the same purpose, and the club was an early construct to go along with the department. So there's a department student organization, I prefer the term, that, and so the club, and they are doing outings as a group. So they're going over to Yellowstone, or they're floating the Salmon River, or they're doing other kinds of activities together, helping them to bond with one another. So I think that's crucial.
Great. And Rob, do you ever bring in any of your...
One
Oh,
thing
go ahead. Yeah. You want to make a comment, Wayne?
No, follow up with Rob.
Oh, okay. Do you bring in any of your alumni to talk to your intro classes? And if you do, what is the impact that has on students?
Yeah. So I bring the existing students in. I think that actually has more impact. So I bring in students that have had internships going during the summer. A, it's cheaper because they're there. And B, I think it's actually more effective because they're still peers, and so the students relate to them, I think, better. All anecdotal, of course. I don't really know what I'm talking about. But we do bring in graduates to our On the Rocks speaker series. So the formal speaker series is where that happens. In a few instances, I have had my class itself involved with a graduate, but that's somebody who's working locally. And so, yeah, we do that. You know, I might add, you know, talking about the diversity piece and the experience of these students with the out of doors and so on, you'd be surprised at how little experience with the out of doors kids from rural America even have. I find it stunning, actually. I will very commonly ask at the beginning of the year how many of them have been to Yellowstone National Park, and out of a group of 25 that are, you know, at a campus that is an hour and a half away from Yellowstone National Park, there may be 2 hands that go up. And so we are also actually working with a student population that is not very inclined towards the out of doors, and this is, of course, a national problem.
And Wayne, you wanted to say something earlier?
Whatever I was going to say is out of my head, but kind of thinking about alums. Again, kind of keep in mind that it wasn't that long ago we only had 4 students, so we don't have a large base of alums that we can turn to for support. So like Rob, we do try to use successful peers as models. So any student that we feel is exemplary in doing something, whether it's internships or whether it's independent research projects, we will take the little resources that we do have to support those students, give them travel to conferences, let them present, and then they bring those experiences back to the campus, and they become role models for the other students, particularly in the freshmen and the sophomores. And they aspire to be like that student and be able to go to the GSA meeting and present. And just see people rally around that. The other thing, as Rob was saying, that they have their Christmas party and the graduation party. We have that as well, and that because so many of our students stay within the New York City community, we keep a database of the locals, and the invitations for these events go out to not just our current students and faculty, but our emeriti and our alums that are local. And a lot of them come back, especially the ones that have graduated within the last few years. And so these end-of-term celebration parties become a chance not to put an alum in front of our undergraduates, but for them to mix and socialize, and we've found that that's really been beneficial for us.
Great. I want to thank our panelists for answering all these questions, and thank our participants as well for giving us so many wonderful questions to discuss. We're going to wrap up the webinar now. I'm going to hand the mic over to Pranoti, and she will end with some finishing comments.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Wayne, and thank you, Rob. This was such a rich discussion. I'm sure many of our participants will be thinking about other questions or comments, not only about today's webinar, but about other webinars you may have attended. Feel free to write to me, or you can also write to Wayne directly or Rob and ask your questions. Also, a recording of this webinar will become available in the coming weeks and will be posted on AGI's website. And so I hope you will be able to share this, this discussion and the content from this webinar with other colleagues who were possibly not able to attend the webinar. Next slide, please. And continuing the next of the webinars from our series, we have another webinar next month on June 21st. And this is about attracting a diverse student population in your programs and departments. So I hope you will be able to join us for this webinar as well. Please feel free to check out the website listed here for previous and forthcoming webinars. Thank you very much and have a fabulous weekend.